Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, Ethan, here. And man, let me tell you something. It has been a rough day today, man. Power has been out for the most part all day. Shout out to Pops. Pops got me downstairs today. The power came back on at his place at some point, so I had to navigate over to where he lives and come record the pod for you guys. So shout out to Pops. He did the right thing there. Good man. Good power. We're just going to get right into it, man. You know, we do Fantasy Football Fridays. And currently, you know, when we record these on Thursday, we tape them on Thursday. Falcons are currently playing the Panthers right now. So that game is currently in progress. And I'll give you short updates here or there. I think Curtis Samuel is doing his thing right now. And I know that's not a lot of what people want to hear right now for sure. But it's 14-6 Panthers. 12 and a half minutes left to go in the second quarter. So Falcons are still giving up points in bunches for sure. But Curtis Samuel he ran for a touchdown in the first quarter. And now he's caught one deep for 29 yards. Yeah, Curtis Samuel was 2 catches, 32 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown as well. Things are going crazy. Also, just for the Mike Davis tracker out there, 6 carries, 33 yards. So there you go. That's the Mike Davis update. If those who are worried about what he's going to get in touches, that's what's going on right now. But we're going to continue on here at the podcast here, and we're going to talk about some injury reports, some news, and then we're going to do some matchup mania and maybe some cross-off teams at the very end of the pod. That is the overall goal here, so let's get it. So, Andy Dalton still remains in concussion protocol, so Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy told reporters that he was able to attend the quarterbacks meeting but will not practice today. Dalton suffered a concussion after taking his shoulder to the helmet in the Cowboys' Week 7 loss. NFL Network insider Ian Rappaport reported that Dalton is unlikely to play Sunday night against the Eagles if he isn't cleared. Rookie Ben DiNucci will start. He's been taking first-team practice reps this week, so that makes a lot of sense. And here on Thursday, so right before the game, so the Carolina Panthers announced that the following COVID-19 replacements for game day was guard Mike Horton, defensive back Natrell Jamerson, receiver Markin Mitchell, should I say. There's no A in that name. So Horton at quarterback, Will Greer, safety Sean Chandler, and offensive lineman Russell Okun, and defensive tackle Zach Kerr were all listed as inactive for this Thursday night game, and Falcons quarterback Kendall Sheffield is questionable to return as he's being evaluated for a possible head injury. Falcons have elevated linebacker Edmund Robinson from the practice squad to the active roster as a COVID replacement for the Carolina game, and running back Ito Smith, cornerback for Jordan Miller, offensive tackle John Wetzel, defensive tackle Marlon Davidson, and defensive end Takaris McKinley, a.k.a. Tack McKinley, are all inactive for the current game on Thursday Night Football. The New York Giants placed left guard Will Henderson on reserve/COVID-19 list. The NFL Network's Tom Pelissero reported the Chicago Bears pass rusher Khalil Mack had an ankle and did not practice for the second consecutive day, and receiver Allen Robinson had a concussion, and receiver and kick returner Cordarrelle Patterson had a quad and was also absent from practice for a second day in a row. Defensive back Eddie Jackson was limited, even with the knee, so that's good to hear, considering what we thought was bad because it was non-contact. At least he was limited in practice. Kansas City, so their defensive lineman Chris Jones, big-time star for them, has a groin injury, and he was a full participant on Thursday, a day after he was limited. And offensive tackle Mitchell Schwartz, not Shorts, his back, he had a back injury, and wide receiver Sammy Watkins had a hamstring, and they both did not practice. Michael Thomas did return to practice in limited capacity for New Orleans, so everybody rejoice, as I will, as Michael Thomas seems to be at least on a reasonable track to be probable for Sunday's game, and that is wonderful news for my fantasy team and for the Saints, honestly. I think their Saints are just better with Michael Thomas, and that's just the end-all, be-all. The Seahawks don't have any real news. The Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Gardner Minshew had a sprain and a small break in his throwing thumb, and his status is unclear for when he will return from the bye. Ian Rappaport reported, per a source informed, the team was not aware of the injury and Minshew was not on the report. The Patriots wideout Julian Edelman recently had surgery on his knee and had been bothering him all season, and he will not play against the Bills on Sunday, and Stephon Gilmore with a knee was limited in practice. The Miami Dolphins wideout Devontae Parker had a groin and was limited in practice, and wideout Jakeem Grant had an illness and did not participate. It was non-COVID related, of course. Minnesota Vikings running back Dalvin Cook with a groin was limited in practice, so that's a good sign that he's out there on the field. Indianapolis Colts center Ryan Kelly did not participate in practice, and Baltimore Ravens running back Mark Ingram and cornerback Jimmy Smith, who had an Achilles, did not practice at all. New York Giants running back Devonta Freeman did not practice. Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end Rob Gronkowski with a shoulder was limited at practice, and wideout Chris Godwin with a finger did not practice. Philadelphia Eagles tackle Lane Johnson was limited in his return to practice, so that's a big thing for Philadelphia because their offensive line is all over the place, and that would not be kosher to not have a better situation there, especially in the NFC East that is looking more and more as a representation of being the NFC least all the time. Detroit Lions running back Adrian Peterson was limited with an abdomen. The Green Bay Packers running back Aaron Jones did not practice with the calf, and after logging it did not practice on Wednesday. Philip Lindsay with concussion symptoms was listed as limited participant in practice. The Buffalo Bills are expected to sign linebacker Darren Lee, reported by Ian Rappaport, and the former Jets and Chiefs player will need to pass a physical and COVID protocols first, and it's uncertain he'll join the 53-man roster or practice squad at this time. San Francisco 49ers linebacker Kawan Alexander and safety Jimmy Ward were upgraded to limited after sitting out on Wednesday, and Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde, safety Jamal Adams, cornerback Shaquille Griffin, missed practice altogether. So that is your injury wrap-up and such for the NFL across the league. Also, not really breaking news, because by the time you hear the podcast, you'll know, but Trevor Lawrence has gotten COVID-19. It says that he's in good health for the most part. I guess he might be asymptomatic, but that is some shocking news. He will not play his game on Saturday. So I will repeat, Trevor Lawrence will miss Saturday's game versus Boston College. So, hey man, anything can happen, I suppose. But I think Clemson will be okay as far as that. Let's go over what's been going on in the fantasy football circles here on my end. let's talk about my miraculous win in Yahoo. So last time we spoke, we didn't know where we would be at as far as the Yahoo game because it came literally down to the wire. And week 7 probably was the toughest week I've had fantasy football in this league. I had no reason to lose. I'm sorry. I had every reason to lose, but I could not lose because I would definitely just been down bad. But Russell Wilson really came through for me when I needed it most. And it just came down to 2 players, Cooper Kupp and David Montgomery. It was a 78.22 to a 77.02 victory. David Montgomery, he didn't do that much, but he did enough. So it worked out for me there. Great news for me, bad news for my opponent. But now we're back in the heat of things because instead of being basically at the bottom of the conference, because there's only 1, 2, and 5 team, and I am in basically a 4-way tie for 5th place in a 10-man league in here. So there's 2 5-2 teams, 2 4-3s, and 3 and 4s are all across the way except for that 1, 2, and 5. And I was threatening to get down to that level, and I said, oh no, cannot allow myself to get involved with all of that. So, I had to go out there and get the dub. You know what we do here. But yeah, man, it's getting tight. Not too many more losses I can afford here, especially with the trade deadline coming up. And I'm in a bad spot here because Josh Jacobs, who really has just been a disappointment, and it's down bad too because I'm not too sure why this is the case. I mean, the offensive line wasn't that great last year, and he seemed to be a little bit better. I guess we thought he'd be better than where he is, but for the most part, he's kind of just been mediocre, especially in non-PPR formats. He hasn't been that great. He's questionable to play. Cleveland situation, if you had Odell, I'm sorry. You know what's going on. Torn ACL, just not good. I am in I've settled down on some things here. Amari Cooper is not starting for me at the wide receiver position, and I'm hoping that Miles Sanders plays on Sunday so that way I don't have to end up having Leonard Fournette be my running back too. But it still may end up happening that way just because, Miles Sanders and Josh Jacobs are questionable. I'm just in a bad position here. And I just wish I wasn't. It's just tough. Just tough. This league is getting tougher and tougher. And I just do so poorly with non-PPR formats. And I don't know if that's just because I draft people in the mindset of PPR. And I just think that the volume should translate. But those 1 points do add up. Those half points do add up, people. They add up. And they definitely make a large case. Currently in my ESPN league, I am still in a 3-way tie for first. That hasn't changed whatsoever. It's quite annoying. But 5-2 there. Still doing well. The rest of the league, my whole division is just competition. Or as the young kids say, comp. My division is comp. And it's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Everybody else is either 4-3 or 3-4, so it's not out of the running. The other side of the division is pretty similar, actually. They just have 2 teams. One guy just won 2 games in a row, and he's 2 games back. So he's trying to surge back after starting 0-5. That was not a solid thing for him. But a guy who was 4-0 has lost 3 straight. He is 4-3. And a guy who in the top of their division who was 4-1 has lost 2 straight. So people are losing left and right. I'm currently on a 1-game win streak because I did lose the week prior to. And somebody is on a 4-game win streak at the top of our division. And, it's getting rough out there, but we're going to keep making do. and we're just going to keep grinding, man. Got Baker Mayfield in the starting lineup. There's really not too much to talk about there. My only player playing this week in the Thursday night game is Mr. Sly. I had to start him, Joey Sly, just because of my kicker situation was a Cowboys player. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on when we get to the Cowboys, but I just, for long story short, I'm not feeling the Cowboys offense right now, and they're just going to have to show me more before I risk my lineup for them again. Even Amari Cooper, even though he seems to be the guy that is a little bit foolproof, which is weird because you'd think it would be Ezekiel Elliott, but that's just not the case either. And I just want no parts of that offense. I wish they were tradable, but at this point, you might as well keep them because their value can't possibly get any worse, so you're just holding on. But we'll just take our first break here, come back in the pod, and continue on this Fantasy Football Friday GSMC right back. Do you ever feel like you're always on? Like, you're on the go all the time, too much going on, and you just need to take a moment to chill? Well, I do all the time. And the way I take that moment to chill is with a ice cold Coors Light. So Coors Light wants you to know that no matter what sport is on this fall, Saturdays are your time to chill out. So even if your team isn't playing this year, there are still plenty of teams and sports on TV that can give you an excuse to chill out and drink a nice ice cold Coors Light beer. Watching football is therapeutic, and even if it's uninterrupted me time and an excuse to chill, drink a beer, do it with Coors Light, man. It's the best, and it's the official beer for watching any sport or team just to drink a beer. Mountain cold refreshment made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged, literally made for you to relax and chill out, man. I just got to tell you, man, you just got to do it, man. Coors Light, I choose it on Sundays. I choose it on college football Saturdays too, man. So Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for that beer that is made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door at get.coorslight.com. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brew Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Nation, we're back. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast here, and we're about to get into some fantasy football primers, some stuff that will get you ready for all the matchups across the league, ready to go, and have you set up for success. I would hope so, right? And that is the best thing for you to do in order to win your leagues, right? You got to be set up for success, and I'm here to help you with that, and so are the guys from Fantasy Pros, that they provided a quite lengthy, extensive primer list of players against different teams and what their potential could be. So we're going to go ahead and get to New England at Buffalo, as New England is an interesting team. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, involved with another team where I feel like I am not touching any of their players with a 10-foot pole, and here's what they have to say about Cam Newton. So Cam Newton, it was another game to forget for him last week, as he was actually benched for poor play. Over the last 3 games, Newton has completed 43 out of 68 passes for 417 yards, which is 6 yards per attempt, with just 1 touchdown and 6 interceptions, 6 of them. His rushing totals can certainly bail him out, but the matchup against the 49ers proved to be more than what he could handle. Outside of Sam Darnold, every quarterback who's played the Bills has finished with at least 20 fantasy points. The question is, does Newton belong in that conversation with Sam Darnold at this point? The Bills' opponents have thrown the ball just 56.5% of the time, while the Patriots have thrown the ball just 50.8% of the time. So this matchup should bring production on the ground. And does that come from Newton or another running back? So, he's accounted for 5 of the 8 rushing touchdowns the Patriots have. And the Bills the Bills have just allowed rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks this year, which is just 2. The downside is that the Bills have not allowed a quarterback to rush more than 42 yards over the last 23 games. And if Newton comes out cold again, they could decide to bench him in a quicker fashion before the games is out of hand. And there's a lot of risk for playing him the way he is. And though this matchup has been good for quarterbacks, it's through the air where 5 of 7 quarterbacks have thrown for 2+ touchdowns. Newton is still someone you should feel comfortable playing as quarterback 2 in Superflex leagues, but he's relatively weak streaming choice in standard formats, though his floor should be higher than most in the middling quarterback 2 area. And on the flip side, Josh Allen, he was in the running for league MVP through 3 weeks, and just 3 weeks later, his fantasy managers are pulling their hair out. So last week was the first one Allen didn't throw at least 2 touchdowns, so it's not full-blown panic mode. But we're starting to see shades of quarterback we saw in 2019. Can he get it back on track against the Patriots defense that hasn't nearly been as good as many expected? Or, did you know that the Patriots have allowed just 8 yards per attempt? Basically 8.5 yards per attempt, which is the second highest mark in football behind only the Falcons. The reason we haven't seen massive numbers against them is due to the lack of volume, and their opponents have averaged just 59.2 plays per game and have chosen to run the ball 50% of the time, and which is the second highest rate in football. The only quarterback who's averaged less than 7.8 yards per attempt was Ryan Fitzpatrick way back in week 1. So it's clearly a different team than the one Josh Allen struggled with last year when he threw for just 361 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions in 2 games combined. He did rush for 69 yards and a touchdown in those games, which certainly does help. It's also good that Josh Allen rushed 19 times over the last 2 weeks for 103 yards, and he'd rushed just 15 times in the previous 4 games combined. So we also can't pretend that his floor is that low, considering that he played poorly in the last 3 weeks, but he still scored 15 or more points every week. This seems to be a slow-paced game, which concerns a lot of people, but Allen remains to be a mid to low-tier quarterback 1. And as far as the running backs go, so we have Sony Michel, Damian Harris, James White, and Rex Burkhead for New England. And the backfield is just not a great place. So we already knew that. It's only going to get worse if Michel is activated off the IR/COVID list this week. And though we suspect that him or Harris would be inactive, but 1 touch for White last week, we don't know what they're doing. They're the weighted opportunity chart per week among these running backs. So White in week 1 had 12.5. Then he did not play for weeks 2 and 3. 23 in week 4, 26.5 in week 6, 2.5 in week 7. So it's a major drop off. Burkhead at 7 week 1, 21 week 2, 31 week 3, 13.5 week 4, 5 in week 6, 14 in week 7. Harris did not play for 3 games, 17 in week 4, 8.5 in week 6, 12.5 in week 7. And I understand that I'm saying some 0.5, some 0.5. It just kind of happens. Week 1, 10. Week 2, 9.5. Week 13, 14. This is for Michel, and they did not play for the remainder of the season. So, in case you did not know, this is not good for fantasy purposes. White has had a semi-consistent role in the offense, which is why Week 7 was such a surprise. And the Bills' opponents have ran the ball 43.5% of the time, which ranks the 12th highest mark in fantasy. So But we know that Newton still steals some of the carries, in the 113.9 fantasy points they've allowed on the ground ranks 5th most in the league. And while 49.5 or 49.1 PPR points they've allowed through the air ranks as the 6th fewest in the league. Expect the Patriots to try and run the ball quite a bit in this game. And as 3 of the 4 opponents, the Bills have totaled just 97 yards on the ground against them and running backs alone. So for now, we'll assume that Michel remains out, and Harris will play as a low-end running back 3 option, who should net at least a dozen carries. And, you have to shake off White's big fat 0 last week, as he's a stable role in his offense for a while. But the matchup is not ideal. Consider him a low-end running back 3 or flex option this week. As for Burkhead, he's had a bigger role than most realized, totaling just 70 or 57 yards in 4 to 6 games, but he's still someone you should not trust more than any emergency running back 4 with everyone healthy. Moving to Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, it's not really a secret that the Bills are struggling to run the ball because of that. We've seen them pass the ball on 61% of their plays, but that will change against the Patriots, who faced a run play of 50% of snaps, which is second highest number in the league. And if they do, who'll get more touches? Both Singletary and Moss finished with 10 touches last week, and though it was Moss who had more efficient, totaling 72 yards, and Singletary with 47, the Patriots have allowed a stable 4.59 yards per carry and 6.55 yards per target to running backs on the season, but they've only faced the 4 lowest weighted opportunity, which is the limited production. How is it possible if teams are running the ball at a 50% of the snaps? Well, the opponents have averaged just 59.2 plays per game, which is the second lowest number in the league. Knowing the Bills' running backs have averaged 20.7 touches per game despite running 64 plays per game is not ideal. And even if we put them in a 50-50 timeshare split, we have no guarantee that either one of them finishes with 10 touches. Singletary has been trending in the wrong direction as his snaps have gone from 55, 54, 44, or 45, 41, and 40 over the last 5 games, and he's slowly losing the grip on the primary back as Moss has played 35 snaps last week. Both of these running backs are at a lower end running back 3 flex conversation, but it might be wise to protect the switch before it happens. So people are saying that Moss might be the guy. As far as wide receivers, I refuse to talk about the Patriots wide receivers. I refuse. It's just because it's just not worth your time. Stefan Diggs, he got the targets we thought he'd get against the Jets last week. Unfortunately, the results of those targets weren't what we'd hoped against the Jets' weak secondary. This is one of the situations where we say process over results. And as you'd play Diggs as a wide receiver 1 all over again if you knew he'd be getting 11 targets against that defense, we do have to start baking the risk of Josh Allen's inconsistency into Diggs' ranking. But despite the recent struggles, Diggs has caught at least 6 passes and scored 14.9 PPR points of 6 of the 7 games. The Patriots are surely going to have Stephon Gilmore cover Diggs, though, and that hasn't been a matchup that's a must avoid this year. He's allowed 15 and 24 passing for 209 yards, 2 touchdowns in his coverage, which is good for a 100.9 quarterback ranking or rating. And as crazy as it sounds, the Patriots have allowed the 3rd most yards per target to wide receivers as a whole. Diggs should remain in lineups as a solid wide receiver 2 option. John Brown, as it seemed, is a wise move to hold Brown out against the Jets. But it seems that he's trying to play through injuries, and it's clearly affected his productivity as he hasn't topped 42 yards since back in week 2, and he hasn't practiced at all much of last week, so there's no guarantee he makes it back this week as well. The Patriots have allowed just the 11th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but it's not because they've been great. They face the 2nd fewest targets in the league through 6 games, and so from an efficiency standpoint, they're actually one of the worst secondaries in the league. And we've already watched 9 wide receivers total 11.5 or more PPR points against them, and marked that just 13 receivers hit against them through 16 games last year. And one Brown And the one Brown would see the most is J.C. Jackson, who has actually been their best corner, allowing just 7.63 yards per target in a 64.5 quarterback rating in his coverage. Given the limited volume against the Patriots, it might just be to ensure Brown is healthy before sticking him in lineups, especially when Josh Allen is struggling a bit over the past 3 weeks. And then Cole Beasley. So people are still watching him trying to do this go on, as we've made this a thing. You know, he's totaled at least 9 PPR points in 19 of his 22 games of the start of the 2019 season. So he's seen at least 6 targets, 6 of 7 games this year, including 12 targets in week 7. And he was the third highest total of his career. The Patriots have struggled a bit with slot receivers. And as we watch Tyler Lockett, Tyreek Hill, and Hunter Renfrow do numbers against them in 2 matchups against last year, when they were a much better defense, Beasley posted up 7 for 75 in his first game and then 7 for 108 in the second game. Knowing that there have been 9 receivers who have posted 11.5 PPR points against the Patriots, it makes you feel even better about this floor. The Patriots slot corner Jonathan Jones has been targeted once every 4.2 snaps, which ranks the 3rd highest among the league. Beasley should be considered a high floor, high end wide receiver 4. So that is your New England and Bills game. I just felt like that was a really nice read, and it highlights a lot of stuff. And real quickly, why I didn't talk about Patriots wide receivers is because they are going in a place where I just refuse to really talk about them anymore. It's so annoying. Patriots wide receivers are bad. On the Bill Simmons podcast, they talked, Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal, they brought up an interesting statistic that was the fact that they have thrown 8 interceptions to wide receivers to 1 touchdown. Cam has thrown 3 touchdowns on the year, and they have the worst separation in the league. Horrifying. If you are starting a wide receiver in a wide receiver really rich NFL season this year, I don't know what else to tell you. You're just down bad. Either you got bad injuries or something, but you should not be doing that. That should not be happening for you. I feel bad for you if you got Patriots starting wide receivers in your lineup. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want any running back starting in my lineup unless somebody is on bye or somebody is hurt and you just had no other choice. I wouldn't want a running back from pretty much either team in this situation, because they're both sides are kind of in a weird place with running back situations. They don't have a main guy. They don't have a guy they can trust. Maybe you can say James White just because of the pedigree, but even he had a weird week last week where he didn't get any touches. So I don't know what's going on in either backfield. We do know that Cam is probably their most consistent runner in the Patriots scheme, so take that as you will. But this is a stay away game for me. I would stay away from a lot of these players if you don't have any trust, except for Cole Beasley. He sounds like he's going to have a nice one. But we're going to take another break, and then we're going to come back into the podcast, continuing on going through some matchups and the like. GSMC.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Nation. We're back talking GSMC football and all the things fantasy. And we're about to get into this Titans at Cincinnati matchup, because I believe that is one that is going to be extremely profitable for all things concerned. So we have an offense that we know what their identity is. We have another one who likes to sling the ball. Or should I say they have no choice because their defense is so bad in the Cincinnati Bengals. But let's talk about Ryan Tannehill, the quarterback here, who's had himself a nice little stretch of games here. And, you know, he had a tough matchup against the Steelers. Tannehill did what he's done ever since he took over the Titans starting job. And that was give fantasy managers a rock-solid floor. And he's now scored at least 17.3 fantasy points in 14 of his 16 starts for the Titans. And keep in mind, he's done all of this with Derrick Henry, who has led the league in rushing. So is Derrick Henry going to crush the Bengals defense this week? He probably is. But does that mean that Tannehill can't do damage? No, it does not. And here are the fantasy points side by side since Tannehill has taken over as the starter. So in week 7 of 2019, Henry had 17 and Tannehill had 19. Week 8, Henry had 6.8, Tannehill had 19. Week 9, 23.4 to 23. Week 10 was 32 to 19. Week 12 was 28 to 32.4. Week 13 was 22 to 13.8. Week 14 was 23.4 to 27.5. Week 15 was 8.6 to 24.2. Week 17 was 39.1 to 17.9. And week 1 of this year was 14.6 to 19.4. Week 2 was 8.4 to 26.8. Week 3 was 26.0 to 11.7. Week 5, because they had their bye and the COVID thing, 18.8 to 30. Week 6 was 39.4 to 28.6. And week 7 was 14 to 17. So, there's room for both of them to produce, and especially when they have a team implied total of 30 points like they do in week 8. And the Bengals have allowed a combination of Baker Mayfield and Phillip Rivers to throw for 668 yards and 8 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. And it only took them 72 pass attempts to get there. And the only quarterback who didn't account for at least 2 touchdowns against the Bengals was Tyrod Taylor back in week 1. It also helps matters that both of these teams rank inside the top 8 in total plays per game. Tannehill should be in the fantasy lineups of for quarterback 1 every week, and this one is no exception. And Joe Burrow, is pretty remarkable what Joe Burrow is able to do as a rookie who had no preseason action. He's thrown for at least 300 yards in 5 of his 7 games, and with 2 games, he didn't coming against the Chargers and the Ravens, 2 top-tier defenses, and he's been a top 12 quarterback throughout 7 weeks. And knowing that A.J. Green has started to come around, we may continue to see his performances get better. Like last week, he racked up a career-high 406 passing yards against the Browns, and the Titans are a team that should be a good matchup for Burrow considering where much of the production goes. Wide receivers have seen a 63.7% target share against the Titans, who ranked the 3rd highest in the league, and that's where Burrow directs 66.6% of his targets, not just the plays per game, but we should see 40-plus attempts per game. So it also helps to know that Burrow might have more time than normal. The Titans haven't recorded more than 2 sacks in any game, and they have the 3rd lowest sack rate in the NFL. The only quarterback who didn't finish with at least 2 passing touchdowns against them was Drew Lock back in week 1. And when you're getting 40-plus attempts and some potential for running upside, as he had rushed for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns, that's a pretty strong streamer if you're streaming quarterbacks. And I don't know if you're streaming Joe Burrow at this point. You might even be starting him. Derrick Henry, let's move on to running back. So, despite already having his bye week out the way, Derrick Henry is tied for the league lead in broken tackles on the ground, and his 3.5 yards after contact is flat out ridiculous. He is now going into a matchup with a defense that has allowed 5 yards per carry and the 2nd highest mark in the league, behind only the Texans, who have allowed 212 rushing yards a few weeks ago to Derrick Henry themselves. So teams only run the ball against the Bengals 42.4% of the time, which is pretty low, and the reason they have faced just 22.4 carries per game. The Titans run the ball 46.5% of the time, and Henry has totaled for at least 19 carries every game this year. And they've already been 8 running backs who have posted at least 60 yards on the ground, including 124 yards and 2 touchdowns to Nick Chubb back in week 2. And going back to last year, they've allowed 7 different running backs to finish as top 12 options. And they've already allowed 4 such running backs in 2020. And they haven't allowed much production through the air. 2 running backs, but we know not to expect that out of Henry by now. So start him as a rock-solid running back 1, who should post a top 10 performance probably. So then we move on to Giamatti Bernard. So you could be wrong assuming that Joe Mixon will be held out for this week, but knowing that they have a bye week after this game, it seemed to make too much sense considering they called him a week-to-week. With his foot injury, Bernard filled in well, taking over the workhorse role and accounting for 18 of 20 running back touches available. He also turned them into 96 and a touchdown, and which was more than Mixon was able to do against the same defense back in week 2. And this is why when you play running backs who are locked in to 15 plus touches, the Titans have allowed a healthy 4.8 yards per carry to running backs this year, which is 7th highest number in the league. And though that's not where Bernard gets a ton of his value, as the Bengals running backs have averaged a combined 3.5 yards per carry behind the poor offensive line. The area that Bernard offered a lot of value, of course, is through the air, which is where the Titans have done a good job. They have allowed just 4.75 yards per target, which is the 7th lowest mark in the league. Still, volume matters, and every running back who's totaled more than 12 touches against them have totaled for 13.9 or more PPR points. Bernard should be considered a stable running back too, as long as Mixon is ruled out, and though he's not what we'd call a smash spot. A.J. Brown, as we get into the wide receivers now. So, he really made his mark since returning into the lineup, racking up 293 yards and 4 touchdowns in 3 games. He's averaged 8 targets per game since his return, which isn't what we consider elite volume, but it's plenty given the fact that him and Tannehill break all efficiency models. So the Bengals they don't have a shadow cornerback. So the matchup will be against a combination of William Jackson if he returns from his concussion and Darius Phillips in coverage. So their unit as a whole has allowed the 17 most points to wide receivers, including 1.9 PPR points per target and the 10th highest mark in the league. And through 7 games, they've already allowed 7 different wide receivers to post 15.4 plus PPR points and finished in the top 20 options against them. So the floor should be intact. There's no reason to even consider benching Brown in redraft leagues. And though this matchup is solid, it's possible that Derrick Henry steals the show. And for daily fantasy purposes, you would reserve Brown for a tournament play with his lack of truly elite targets in a matchup that Henry should run for a while. Corey Davis saw a team-high 10 targets last week, though they only led to 6 catches for 35 yards, and unfortunately he caught a touchdown, which salvaged his fantasy day. The 10 targets was his highest total since week 10 of 2018, and he hasn't been a sexy start, but, Davis has now seen at least 5 targets in each of his 4 games and has topped 11.9 PPR points every one. And with Tannehill playing at such a high level, it gives him fantasy value. The Bengals have allowed 1.9 PPR points per target to wide receivers. That's led to 10 different receivers finishing at least with 10.9 PPR points in the top 40 option, or as his top 40 option, So he'll see Darius Phillips in coverage for most of the game, a third-year cornerback who's allowed 16 of 28 for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns this year. And he's only seen 70 targets in coverage over the course of his career, but has allowed 6 touchdowns on them. So basically that's 1 for every 11 and a half basically targets. So Davis might find another touchdown once again this week, and he should be considered a mediocre wide receiver 4 option who's presented a higher floor than most realize. And then we have Adam Humphries, who was seeing 6 targets in each of his first 5 games. Humphries disappeared in week 7 and caught just 1 of 3 targets for 19. it's just one game, but we have to understand that with everyone healthy, this target floor is always going to dip, and that's the problem. As you know, we never going to him as a ceiling option. The Bengals have faced an average of 18.7 targets per game to wide receivers, which doesn't really feel like enough to find more than a handful of targets for Humphries. Mackenzie Alexander has struggled a bit in coverage, but there's no way that we can start Humphries at anything more than a 5 or 6 wide receiver type option. So now we're moving on to the Bengals side of the wide receiver realm. This is where we get fun. So Tyler Boyd. So the writer hopes to take his advice and bought low on Boyd, who they view as the number one wide receiver in this offense. His current 16-game pace is 139 targets, 110 receptions for 1,182 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that would have been enough to be the number 7 wide receiver in PPR formats last year. This matchup against the Titans is great for the Bengals wide receiver trio, as 63.7% of the passes to their opponents have been thrown and directed at wide receivers, so which is the third highest mark in the league. It also helps to know that they've allowed the second fewest yards per reception to wide receivers, as it seems that to highlight Boyd's role in the middle of the field, while both Green and Higgins have been targeted further down the field. Both have an average depth of target of 13.5 plus yards, and while Boyd averages 8.8 air yards per target, the Titans have used a combination of Chris Jackson and Christian Fulton to defend the slot, and they've combined for allowed 24 of 30 passes and 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Boyd is definitely going to be a stable wide receiver too. And for T. Higgins, despite seeing 15 fewer targets than AJ Green on the season, Higgins has totaled for 113 more yards and 3 more touchdowns than him. Higgins has also scored at least 10.2 PPR points each week of his last 5 games. And despite seeing no targets in week 1 and playing on a limited role in week 2, Higgins is the number 24 receiver in PPR format. So now going into a game with the Titans, who have faced the 4th most wide receiver targets in football, Higgins lines up at RWR for the right wide receiver as most of the time, which means that he'll see veteran corner Jonathan Joseph in coverage more than anybody else. He's 36-year-old, who is certainly on the downturn of his career, allowing 14.7 yards per reception and 3 touchdowns on 23 targets in coverage through 7 games. And there have already been 13 wide receivers who have totaled just at least 10.5 PPR points against him this year. So when you combine that with Higgins' floor, joining the starting lineup, you have yourself a strong wide receiver 3 this week. And if we talk about AJ Green, at the start of the season, if we started the season week 6, we'd be looking at Green like he's a player he's always been. He racked up 24 targets and turned into 15 receptions for 178 yards over the last 2 weeks, and he still has yet found the end zone on 58 targets, which is the highest target total without a touchdown. The closest players are Julian Edelman and Jarvis Landry, who have both seen 39. And with Burrow playing the way he is, it's only a matter of time. Is this the week where Green finds his first touchdown? The Titans have allowed 9 to wide receivers, which is the 6th most in the league. And it also doesn't hurt that, Green's primary matchup this week is Malcolm Butler, who has seen a league-high 48 targets in coverage. And he's allowed just 1 touchdown in his coverage, but he's allowed 376 yards in his coverage, which is the 8th most in football. So teams do believe he's the one to target. And knowing that the Titans have faced an average of 25.2 targets per game, 2 wide receivers alone, Green should have no issues getting up there in targets again. And it's fair to say that he's back to wide receiver 3 radar this week, and the arrow is pointing up. So to wrap this up real quick, we're going to take a break. And we're going to continue on and talk more fantasy football. We're going to get into who I do not believe in anymore to wrap up the podcast and finish it out. GSMC, we'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Nation, we're going to finish up this Titans at the Bengals game, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about who I don't believe in anymore when it comes to fantasy football. So let's continue on. Titans, tight ends. Jonnu Smith. So in 2 games where every wide receiver is healthy, Smith has seen 11 of the team's 73 targets for a relatively weak 15.1% target share, and that's not ideal, even if Smith has been the hyper efficient with his targets. And the good news about the potential bounce back is that teams have targeted their tight ends 25.7 times in the time against the Bengals this year, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. And that bodes extremely well for his floor. And they've played 7 games and have allowed, 7 top 15 tight end performances, including 2 of them last week with the Browns tight ends, Harrison Bryant and David Njoku, who combined for 6 catches, 76 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And they've allowed 480 yards to tight ends this year, which ranks 3rd most in the NFL. And Smith should be back in the lineups with a solid tight end 1 this week and should get back on track. And then Drew Sample, who's had a bumpy ride and whose target totals have gone from 1 to 9 to 1 to 5 to 2 to 1 to 6. And there's no predictability about that except for the low floor, and he's reached 50 or 45 yards in the last 3 different games, and 2 of them were against the Browns and 1 of them was against the Jaguars. So teams that have struggled against tight ends. And the next question is, do the Titans struggle against tight ends? And well, they've allowed at least 50 yards and a touchdown to 5 of 6 tight ends that they've played, except for 1, which was Dawson Knox, who just saw 3 targets, and they've allowed the 7 most fantasy points per game to tight end position, including 2 PPR points per target, which is the 10th most. And, it's a plus matchup, though the wide receivers have great matchups too, and Samples should be considered a middling tight end too, and it might not be the worst solution to bye week issues, but understand that his floor is lower than most. So that is your Titans-Bengals lineup. So to wrap up the podcast, I figured I should talk about guys who I don't believe in anymore. And I started off with the Patriots. So let me reiterate. I don't want any skill position that is on the New England Patriots. A lot of things have been said about the Patriots in recent time this week about what they've done in the past and how they've done now, what has led to, and there's been a lot of revisionist history about just how much was Tom Brady responsible for the Patriots' success. And, there's always been this thing about if Tom Brady was more valuable than Bill Belichick was, and, that whole Super Bowl where Bill Belichick basically coached his magnum opus game against the Los Angeles Rams, right? That was a big time thing, and now it's seemingly that people are starting to shift their mindset into believing that Bill Belichick has kind of platooned this team, and Tom Brady was so good, and I guess Belichick to a fault, has kept them afloat for this long. Because if we think about it from this perspective, and this is nothing new, everybody's been saying this, the Patriots have drafted horribly at the skill position. They have not drafted a stud basically since 2012, and they traded him away. So they have not seen anybody come into the Patriots system via the draft that has been any good. All their wide receivers that they've drafted have not panned out. Majority of their skill positions they've drafted have not panned out, except for Dante Hightower, who, most people don't consider linebacker skill positions. Say what you will. It is, and maybe Patrick Chung. Everybody else is just not up to par, and it's been really sad. Sony Michel was really good at Georgia. I don't know what happened. Don't know. When your best running back is still James White, and you've had all these drafts, when you could argue and say that LeGarrette Blount has been their best running back in the past 10 years, it's not good. They still have Rex Burkhead on roster. They have no wide receiver depth at all. And by depth, I mean they have no talent. It is horrifyingly bad. So, we have to think about what Cam's going through as a quarterback because he hasn't looked good. I don't know what's wrong with him in particular. He's been missing some throws. Maybe it's just the fact that he hasn't really gotten the reps in still, but he just hasn't looked good. There's nothing to sugarcoat that with. He has not looked good. But, when your wide receivers are not getting the separation, they have the worst separation in the league, mind you. That's just a bode for disaster. It's not good, and I want no part of them. They are a bad place. There's 3 teams here that I want no part of. Now, the Jets are basically right there for the most part. Sam Darnold is not a good play. If you're playing Sam Darnold, you're probably in similar positions as me, but just worse. There has to be another quarterback. I'd start Daniel Jones before Sam Darnold. If you can get Tua, I'd start him before Sam Darnold. I'm starting Baker this week. Fingers crossed he does not burn me, but I've been burned before, and at this point, it is what it is. But who else would I? There's not too many left around. I probably would start Kyle Allen over Sam Darnold, even though I'm not too confident to say it. But here's the thing. I'm not too afraid to stream guys who play in the NFC East because everybody is terrible. So I have no, if they're going up against another NFC East team, I'm not afraid to start the opposite quarterback in that scenario, especially if he's available. So the Jets, we understand Jamison Crowder. It's pretty solid. He gets volume. He's their best offensive weapon on the team. And I know that Perine came on a bit last week, but the team is still abysmal. Their best player is an offensive lineman. And we've seen that story before in Cleveland. And that was a train wreck too. Want no parts of that. And they just basically are biding their time to where they secure the number 1 spot, fire their head coach, and maybe they'll show some life. But for now, I see nothing, and I want nothing to do with the Jets. At this point, they should be relegated out of football, but it's not possible because there's no relegation, but it needs to happen at some point. This is ridiculous. I don't want to see this anymore. I'm tired of seeing the Jets be bad. I'm tired of seeing it for Jets fans. And honestly, I'm tired of seeing Adam Gase coach football. Maybe that's just me. Number 3. Hurts me to say this, man. It was a strong 4 weeks. It was a strong 4 weeks. It was a beautifully strong 4 weeks of Dak Prescott's led Dallas Cowboys. And then everything just went down the drain, man. The injury really was just bad. But I just didn't think it would get this bad. I don't think anybody expected the Dallas Cowboys offensively to look on par with what their defense looks like. Their defense has left the window. Their defense hasn't shown up since 2019. Since 2020, their defense is yet to be found. MIA, missing in action. But their offense has just disappeared. I understand that Amari Cooper still has been racking in some decent numbers for considering the situation that he's in. And maybe he's the only guy who you can start, and he's probably now a wide receiver 2 instead of a possible wide receiver 1 play. I don't even want to start Amari Cooper. In fact, I'm not this week because I just don't believe in his offense. Look, they're starting a guy they drafted in the 7th round. He's not from anywhere that we know of. The 7th round, it's not good. This is a horrible situation. CeeDee Lamb had his worst game last week. I don't expect that to happen every week, but Jesus Christ, his team is in shambles. I don't even know what you want to do. I'm convinced that if it wasn't for the Philadelphia Eagles, there'd be not one team in the NFC East that would actually want to try and win the NFC East. There's no point. Whoever they face, they're going to get smacked. They're going to get just trampled, demolished. It's horrifyingly bad. Horrifyingly bad. And you just want no parts of that kind of lifestyle, man. It's just not good. And all I can say is, hopefully everybody relaxes. I hope you just remove them and deal with it. If they score something, congrats. The only two that I'd say are just go ahead and put them in if you feel like you have no other choice. Amari Cooper and Dak. I'm sorry, not Dak. You can't put him in there. Amari Cooper and Ezekiel Elliott. So Ezekiel Elliott, understand, he's a running back. You probably drafted him in the top 6. Just do it. He won't get 6 again. It just feels bad, man. I feel bad for this team just because this is just not the expectations that they had. And, of course, I say it a lot. When you give the Cowboys a certain level of expectations, that's generally when they break your heart. And this time, it just hurts a little bit more because it's not like they're just underachieving normally. They are vastly underachieving and by different ways, you know. Injuries just tank their season anyway, but even before the injuries, they're all over the place. Jalen Smith has played horrifically. DeMarcus Lawrence is nowhere to be found. Don't know where that guy is at all on the football field. His name is out there. Might be a different guy. Might be a different DeMarcus Lawrence, but he is not there for sure. But yeah, those are my 3 teams. I'm not, unless something changes drastically, those are the 3 I want no parts of for the remainder of this fantasy season. As we're getting to the nitty gritty, man, we're about one in, at least our league, we have week 10 trade deadline. So after week 10, no more trades. And as we coast into the fantasy playoffs from then, so it's all getting hard and it's all getting, it's getting serious for real. And I'm trying to make every move possible. To the people who have Hasty right now, real quickly, unless somebody's like, if somebody's asking you for them and they have a 49er on their team, relax. Don't trade them away, because unless they're going to offer you more value than you could ever imagine, don't do it, because it's just not going to benefit you. You probably need him for what he's going to produce this week. And, you know, sometimes it's not good to just help your opponents because eventually you'll have to play them again. And it could affect seeding in different ways. I want no parts in helping people win, even when it's just like, they're saying it's just a 3rd string running back. But you know what? He's getting, or he's about to receive, running back 2 type of volume and touch work. So that can all go out the window. I don't care where his place in the lineup was or his depth chart. The 49ers will find a way to make everybody work in that system because that's what they do. They're a machine. Kyle Shanahan is probably the best play caller in the NFL. He's the most intuitive play caller that we have. In a way that people talked about Sean McVay, should be the same way that people continues to talk about Kyle Shanahan. And as we've seen thus far, Kyle Shanahan survived. And, Dan Quinn did not. Not to say that Dan Quinn was a solid play caller to begin with. It was more just his defensive stuff and, togetherness, the brotherhood. We hear all that all the time in Atlanta. But that is that's the crux of the situation there. Kyle Shanahan is really good. And when he puts somebody in position to succeed, they typically do. And I understand that Tevin Coleman should be back soon. But this is a play too. This should be a strong play because we've seen what he's done. He looks explosive. He looks fine. And the 49ers have not looked healthy. So maybe he comes back. I just hold on. Just wait. But this is going to be the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for this Friday, guys. We did it. No power outage will stop me. And hopefully it doesn't stop you all either. If you're in near the Gulf, hope everyone's safe. Shout out to all my people in Louisiana. Shout out to all my people in New Orleans. I hope you all are doing well, and either you evacuated or you had a safe place to stay, no power outages are hurting you that bad, and you weren't at the worst brunt of it. But yeah, man, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Like, subscribe, share the pod. Don't forget to follow us on social media, our Facebook and Twitter at GSMC Fantasy Football. You'll see all my pod mates who, share this podcast network with me. And, we're getting it in. It's the nitty gritty time, man. It's week 8. Let's go NFL, man. GSMC is Ethan signing out. I will see you on Tuesday, as you know, and we'll talk about what happened during Sunday. GSMC.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.